Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. How do we understand the Biden policy in the Middle East in his first 5 weeks? Let's begin with the report that was released as to Jamal Khashoggi's execution on Friday. A report that the Obama administration, or that the Biden administration, the Joe Obama administration, if you will, had said, oh, this was suppressed by the Trump administration. It's time to get the truth out. Because for some reason, the media in the West, particularly in the U.S., has lionized Jamal Khashoggi, even though he was a bin Laden sympathizer, even though he was a Qatari intel source. Bizarre. Very bizarre. I wonder if this has to do with something as to Joe Obama policy towards jihadists in his first 2 terms and now in their collective third term. Jen Psaki was on with Dana Bash, State of the Union, over the weekend. And she was asked about, the tough talk from candidate Joe Biden about Jamal Khashoggi's death and holding senior officials in Saudi Arabia responsible if it was proven that they had ordered his killing, starting it with Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince. But there hasn't been any follow-through. So you released the report, which purports to confirm that MBS ordered Khashoggi's killing, but then you don't do anything about it. Explain. And Psaki tried.
President Trump has not punished senior Saudi leaders. Would you?
Yes. I would make it very clear. We were not going to, in fact, sell more weapons to them. We were going to, in fact, make them pay the price and make them, in fact, the pariah that they are. They have to be held accountable.
Candidate Biden, you heard there, said he would hold Saudi Arabia accountable. Now that he's president, he's imposed no travel ban, no asset freeze, no criminal charges, and most importantly, no sanctions directly on the Crown Prince himself. Why not?
Well, first, Anna, from the first day of the administration, we have been crystal clear at every level, from the president on down. We're going to recalibrate this relationship and turn the page from the last 4 years. And that means ending our support for the war in Yemen, doing more to address the humanitarian crisis, and ensuring that we are holding to account the actions, the human rights abuses of this government by word and by action. The release of this report, which was held back over the last 4 years, is part of that, making that clear to the public. But we've also taken a number of steps through the Treasury Department, through the State Department, to sanction the deputy head of intelligence, to sanction the revolutionary forces in Saudi Arabia, and to make clear that we will never let this happen again. And
for reaction to that spin, that effort at spin, really, I wouldn't even call it effective spin, just an effort at spin. We're pleased to be joined again by Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, Vice President of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation, author of books including Wiki at War and Private Sector Public Wars. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yes, we ought to start with what is America's interest? And we call it the Middle East for a reason, because it's in the middle of everything. It is the intersection of energy. It is the intersection of international air travel, finance, population movements, strategic waterways. It's an area that if it is peaceful and quiet and prosperous, the United States benefits. It's like not having your neighbor next door's house on fire. And what are the chief threats to that? One is keeping great power meddling out of the region, China and Russia principally. The other is containing Iran, which is the great destabilizing threat to the region. And the other is promoting peace and prosperity, and so countries can focus on their development and economic integration and aren't facing the rise of Islamic extremism. So when you look at the president's policies, you have to ask, does it advance any of these goals? And the problem is, no. So pulling support for against the Houthis, which are a surrogate of the Iranian regime, and are a terrorist group, and have harbored al-Qaeda, and routinely conduct human rights abuses and attacks on Saudi territory. That's not about punishing Saudi Arabia. That's about a gimme to the Iranians to get them to let us come back into the Iran deal. So I'm sorry, where does this advance America's interests? And the answer is I'm not seeing it yet from this administration.
Well, I want to read a passage from a recent post from Caroline Glick, formerly of the Jerusalem Post, who I think is really one of the great sophisticated foreign policy thinkers in this region. She writes about Joe Obama and characterizing Biden as a third Obama term, essentially, at least with respect to their disposition towards that region. In every conflict that pitted either conservative Sunni leaders, Iranian anti-regime forces, or Israel against jihadists, from Hamas to Hezbollah to the Muslim Brotherhood to the Houthis to Iran, Obama and his people supported the jihadists. For this reason, Obama admired both Turkish dictator Erdogan and the Qatari ruling family. Like him, they supported jihadists. Saudi Crown Prince MBS and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed from the UAE were big problems for Obama and his ilk. They appeared out of nowhere. Young and vigorous, they seek to liberalize their conservative societies. They are deeply opposed to Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood. They are open to peace and cooperation with Israel. They support Israel in its campaigns against Hamas and Hezbollah, and they are certainly authentic Arab Muslims. And then she goes on to characterize Khashoggi, but the bottom line is that she said, she writes, when the UAE declared the Muslim Brotherhood and Obama's key supporters and ideological allies as terrorist organizations, CAIR, Obama and his comrades were so angry they could barely put together a coherent sentence. So does she have that sussed out about right in terms of getting the backstory, in terms of the disposition of the Biden administration, like the disposition of the Obama administration, and thus this performance art with respect to the execution of Jamal Khashoggi, even though this is not some endorsement of MBS and it's certainly not an endorsement of executing Jamal Khashoggi, but the geopolitics of this does she have it the landscape about right?
Well, I think there are two themes there that she teases out, which are three really. One is a continuation of Obama era policies that so far this administration in this part of the world seems the most determined to essentially ignore the last 4 years and go back to the old policies. And I think she describes one of the two themes correctly, which is the far left wing of the party, which includes very substantial senior Obama advisors. All their sentiments are with the most extremist Islamist forces in the region, including Hamas and Hezbollah, and sympathy for the Houthis, and it is and that causes them to distance from all of the key allies in the region, which are the bloc against not just expansion of Iranian influence, but the intrusion of Chinese influence and Russian influence, and that is Saudi Arabia, Turkey as problematic as that relationship is, Egypt and Israel. So she's right. The far left wing of the party is very comfortable with supporting all the people that would crush freedom and democracy and enable the extremists in the region. That's true. But the other theme in which Obama and now the Biden administration is consistent is the answer for them is to largely disengage from the region and to essentially throw it to its own devices. Now, that's the easy path because it pleases the radicals and the most extreme parts of the party, and it also requires them to do as little as possible. The Trump policies are an anathema to both those trends, and I think that's why they largely abandon them, not just because they hate Donald Trump and he has orange hair and tweets too much. The policies were preventing them from doing what they naturally want to do, which actually is to turn the region over to the Muslim Brotherhood. And that would not end well for anybody.
Yeah, so Iran rejected the U.S. offers for nuclear talks. And what does Iran want? I mean, is this all about sanctions? They're not going to meet with us and then we give them some relief on sanctions?
Well, in this part of the world, honor is power. you are an honorable person not if you're nice to people and pay your taxes. You're an honorable person if you can inflict power and punishing and shame on others. And Iran just doesn't want the United States to come back into the Iran deal. They want the U.S. to come back in a way that the U.S. is humiliated. And so generous offers such as, oh, we won't support the Houthis anymore, and we're not going to do those snapback sanctions at the UN, rather than seeing those as efforts of accommodation, Iran sees them as signs of weakness. And what they want is more weakness. They want the United States to beg to come back into the deal. So the Iranians can say, we are powerful and you are not. And yes, they're willing to accept massive economic damage to wait for that to happen, because that's who they are.
I want to go back to something you said about the disposition of the most left elements of the Democrat Socialist Party, which is where the energy is in the party. Want to turn the region over to the Muslim Brotherhood. That won't end well. I think we can figure out how it wouldn't end well to have radicalized terrorists in charge of states in that region. But I think people have a hard time hearing that and saying, why would they want to do that? What do they think is going to happen? What is the play here? They have a hard time believing that you have a major party in this country that sides with Islamist jihadists over and over again.
Well, so you have to go back, to ideology, which is, I think, something that we have forgotten in this country. In the Cold War, we had this notion of, well, there is right and wrong. But when you look at the core of the most radical elements of the president's party, it is completely anti-democratic. I mean, what do the Muslim Brotherhood and groups like BDS and Antifa, all have in common? Which is they have a common strain of authoritarian socialism, which looks to transform society in different ways. Many of the mentors of the people who are in the Obama administration and now in the Biden administration were the most violent radicals of the 1960s that belonged to groups like the Weatherman Underground and to the Black Panther Party. The root of their ideology was Maoist ideology. It was authoritarian, radical, violent socialism. If you look at the roots of the Muslim Brotherhood, it is they were very sympathetic to the ideas of Hitler and fascists, and so these extreme authoritarian ideologies, these are deeply rooted in the far left. The far left is as anti-democratic as you possibly can imagine, and the language is clothed in the principles of human rights and democracies, as was the language of Stalin and Lenin when they talked about the best for all mankind, and this is for the good of everybody. But the reality is that the common root is there, and it is about it's about transforming the world and not recognizing boundaries of what's best for America, what's best for Americans, and it's just a dimension of competition we've kind of forgotten. When the House Foreign Affairs Committee was working on a staff report on China, they wanted it to be bipartisan. But when they got to the part about ideology and they wanted to call out the ideology of the Chinese state, which, again, has many common roots with the Muslim Brotherhood conceptually, the Dems refused to get on board. They wouldn't go there. And the reason they wouldn't go there is because there are leaders in that party that think that there's nothing wrong with what China wants to do.
Is there enough advancement in peace in that region through the Abraham Accords, for example, that those actors who did come together under the Trump administration will provide enough of a bulwark against any expansionist Iran or jihadist organizations, even if the U.S. leads with genuflection?
We simply don't know. Right. So, I mean, on one hand, we have a coalition government here. I mean, this is like if this was in Europe, it'd be like all the Greens and everybody all in one party. There are sensible people in this administration that recognize that what we did under Obama was a tragic error, and to go back there is dumb. How reality intrudes. When I'm sure Biden didn't want to be bombing things in Syria, but in a sense the Iranians forced him to because they were so aggressive. Sometimes reality forces your head, as it did for Obama. Obama actually was forced to go back into the region and fight the caliphate. He didn't want to do that. So I don't know.
Lieutenant
but it gets,
yeah.
I'm sorry. It gets to the core point, of what happened in the last election. Nobody voted on Middle East policy. Nobody voted on China. Nobody voted on border immigration security. They voted on all kinds of other things. But the reality is when you elect administration and you bring it in, they bring their policies in, and you get all of that. And so, we got what we voted for.
Elections have consequences, as someone famously said. Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, Vice President of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation. Jim, thanks as always.
Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro